Some words don't slap you across the face. They smile first. Then they stay with you for the rest of your life. My God, Ethan, you're embarrassing me. Olivia didn't even lower her voice. She smirked as she adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist, her emerald evening gown shimmering beneath the crystal chandeliers. The corners of her lips curled upward just enough for everyone standing nearby to know she meant every syllable. You look like you wandered in from the parking garage. A few executives chuckled politely. Someone coughed to hide a laugh. Another man lifted his champagne glass without meeting my eyes. I stood there, hands resting loosely in the pockets of the same navy tuxedo I'd worn only twice before. It wasn't custom-made, it wasn't designer, but it fit well enough, and until that moment, I'd believed it belonged in a room like this. Apparently, I didn't. The Grand Crescent Ballroom glowed beneath enormous chandeliers that scattered warm light across polished marble floors. Waiters drifted silently through the crowd, carrying silver trays filled with champagne flutes that probably cost more than the pickup truck I'd driven for nearly 15 years. Around me stood governors, CEOs, senators, philanthropists, television personalities, and people whose names usually appeared on buildings instead of business cards. Olivia belonged among them. At least that's what everyone believed. She had spent the last decade climbing every social ladder she could find. Charity boards, museum committees, political fundraisers, hospital foundations. She knew which fork to use before dinner was served and which smile belonged to donors versus reporters. I used to admire that. Lately, it felt like she practiced those smiles more than she practiced being my wife. You could have at least rented something nicer, she whispered without looking at me. People notice. I thought you said this wasn't about appearances. It isn't. She paused. It just doesn't help when my husband looks ordinary. Ordinary. Funny how one word can suddenly outweigh 20 years of marriage. I didn't answer. Men my age learn something after enough birthdays. Every argument has a price. Some are simply too expensive. Instead, I watched the orchestra tuning their instruments near the stage while conversations floated through the ballroom like expensive perfume. Someone behind us recognized Olivia. Mrs. Brooks. She turned instantly. The embarrassed wife disappeared. The polished philanthropist arrived. Oh, Daniel, it's wonderful to see you. Her laugh came easily now. Bright. Elegant. Perfect. She introduced herself to another donor, accepted compliments about the charity committee, discussed upcoming auctions, and somehow never once introduced the man standing quietly beside her. I wasn't offended anymore. I'd become accustomed to disappearing. It hadn't always been like that. When Olivia and I first met 22 years earlier, we were broke enough to split one burger at a roadside diner outside Lexington. She loved how little I cared about expensive things. She used to say my calm made the whole world feel quieter. Back then, she'd squeeze my hand under restaurant tables because she couldn't bear not touching me. Tonight, she barely acknowledged I existed. Success changes people. Sometimes so slowly you don't notice until you're standing beside someone who looks exactly like the person you married but feels like a complete stranger. I reached for a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. My fingers had barely touched the stem when Olivia leaned closer again. For once, she muttered through another flawless smile. Please don't say anything tonight. I looked at her. I wasn't planning to. Good. She exhaled softly. I've worked too hard building relationships in this room. Our eyes met for only a second, long enough for me to recognize something that hurt far more than contempt. Shame. She wasn't embarrassed by my clothes, or my truck, or the fact that I'd never cared about status. She was embarrassed by me. The orchestra began playing. Spotlights swept across the stage. The Master of Ceremonies walked toward the podium as nearly 600 guests settled into their seats. Conversations faded. Silverware stopped moving. The ballroom fell quiet. Olivia slipped her hand through my arm, just as photographers aimed their cameras toward the front tables. To anyone watching, we looked like the perfect couple. I almost smiled at the irony, because sometimes the most convincing performances happen inside the happiest photographs. The MC welcomed everyone to the annual Legacy of Hope Gala before thanking sponsors, volunteers, and distinguished guests. It sounded like every fundraising dinner I'd ever attended. Predictable, polished, forgettable. Then, without warning, I noticed something strange. The host looked away from his script. His eyes scanned the ballroom. Not randomly, deliberately, searching. He apologized into the microphone. "Excuse me for just a moment." Instead of continuing his speech, he stepped down from the stage. 600 pairs of eyes followed him. He walked directly toward our table. Toward me. I frowned. Olivia stiffened beside me. The room grew quieter with every step he took. When he finally stopped in front of us, he smiled as though greeting an old friend. "Mr. Brooks," he said warmly, "we've all been waiting for you." Then he extended a wireless microphone into my hands. There are moments when an entire room begins looking at you before you understand why. Those moments feel strangely silent, as if the world is holding its breath while you search for an answer everyone else already seems to know. The microphone rested in the host's outstretched hand. No one moved. Not the photographers, not the waiters, not even the orchestra. 600 people simply watched. Beside me, Olivia's fingers slowly slipped away from my arm. I could almost hear the question forming inside her head. "What is happening?" The host smiled patiently. "Mr. Brooks," he repeated, his voice warm enough for the first few tables to hear. "Whenever you're ready." I looked at him for a moment before accepting the microphone. It felt surprisingly light. The room, however, suddenly felt much heavier. Someone near the front whispered my name. Another guest leaned toward his wife. A few board members exchanged knowing glances that made absolutely no sense to anyone else. Olivia stared at me as though she'd accidentally walked into the wrong ballroom. "Ethan." Her voice was barely audible. "What is this?" I smiled politely. "I'm not entirely sure." It wasn't a lie. I hadn't expected to speak tonight. In fact, I had spent most of the evening trying not to be noticed. That had become something of a habit over the years. People often assume quiet men have nothing to say. The truth is usually much simpler. We've simply learned that not every room deserves our words. The host gestured toward the stage. "Please." The applause began softly, scattered at first. Then another table joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom echoed with respectful clapping that seemed completely disconnected from the version of me Olivia believed existed. As I walked toward the stage, polished marble reflected the warm chandelier light beneath my shoes. Every step sounded louder than it should have. Not because the room was noisy, because it wasn't. Silence has weight, especially after public humiliation. I climbed the short staircase and turned toward the audience. From up there, the ballroom looked different. Less glamorous, more human. I saw tired eyes behind expensive smiles. Successful people hiding lonely marriages. Politicians pretending certainty. Business leaders checking stock prices beneath linen-covered tables. Money decorates people. It doesn't simplify them. The host leaned toward me. "We've waited years for this." "Years?" I looked at him. His smile never faded. He simply nodded once before quietly stepping away. The spotlight settled across my shoulders. Warm, bright, unavoidable. Down below, Olivia sat frozen. She wasn't angry. She wasn't smiling. She simply looked confused. I recognized that expression. I'd worn it myself years earlier when I realized success changes more than bank accounts. It changes introductions. When Olivia and I first married, she'd introduce me before introducing herself. "This is Ethan, my husband." She always sounded proud. Eventually that became, "This is Olivia Brooks, committee chair, board member, vice president." And somewhere after all those titles, I quietly disappeared from the sentence. At dinners like this, people assumed I was another spouse enjoying free champagne. Sometimes they asked what I did. I always answered honestly, "I work." That usually ended the conversation. The funny thing about ordinary answers is that they make extraordinary assumptions grow even faster. No one asks many questions after you've convinced them you're unimportant. I never corrected anyone. Status has always been the least interesting thing about a person. Character isn't announced. It's revealed. My father taught me that long before I understood what he meant. He built houses across Kentucky for nearly 40 years. Not luxury homes, just solid places where families could grow old together. One afternoon, when I was 12, I asked him why he never put his name on any of the homes he built. He smiled without looking up from his hammer. "If the house is good," he said, "people remember living in it." He drove another nail. "They don't need to remember who held the hammer." That sentence stayed with me longer than any inheritance ever could. Maybe that's why attention always felt uncomfortable. Recognition fades. Purpose doesn't. The ballroom remained perfectly still. The host returned to the podium but didn't interrupt. Instead, He watched me with the quiet confidence of someone who already knew how the next few minutes would change the room. I looked once more toward Olivia. Our eyes met. For the first time all evening, she wasn't looking at my tuxedo, or my shoes, or wondering whether I belonged here. She was looking at me as if she had suddenly realized there was an entire chapter of my life she'd never bothered to read. And somehow, I had the feeling this was only the first page. The strangest thing about hidden lives is this: they remain invisible only until someone else decides to tell the truth. I adjusted the microphone, letting the silence settle instead of rushing to fill it. Silence isn't awkward when it's earned. It becomes expectation. "Good evening," I began. My voice carried effortlessly through the ballroom. I wasn't expecting to be standing here tonight. A ripple of soft laughter spread across the audience. I actually came here planning to stay exactly where I've spent most of my adult life. I smiled. In the background, more laughter. Even Olivia managed a faint, uncertain smile, though I could see she still didn't understand why any of this was happening. Neither did most of the guests. To them, I was simply another husband who had somehow wandered onto the stage. The host remained beside the podium, watching quietly. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't worried I'd say the wrong thing. He looked relieved, as though something overdue was finally happening. "I've always believed," I continued, "that the people doing the most important work are usually the ones you've never heard of." A few heads nodded. The nurse who stays 30 minutes after her shift because a frightened child needs someone to hold her hand. The volunteer who arrives before sunrise and leaves after everyone else. The maintenance worker who fixes problems before anyone notices they existed. They rarely appear in magazines. They rarely receive awards. But without them, I paused. None of us would be sitting here tonight. The applause came naturally this time. Not loud, respectful, sincere. I noticed several volunteers seated near the back, smiling at one another. Those smiles meant more than standing ovations ever could. Then I looked toward the first row. A silver-haired gentleman slowly rose to his feet. Richard Holloway, chairman of the board, one of the most respected businessmen in the country. He began clapping, not politely, deliberately. One by one, the rest of the board members followed. Several major donors stood beside them. Within seconds, dozens of the most influential people in the ballroom were on their feet. The rest of the audience instinctively joined. Another standing ovation. This one wasn't for the speech. It was for something else. Something Olivia clearly didn't understand. She leaned toward the woman sitting beside her. I watched their lips move. "Who is he?" The woman looked surprised. "You don't know?" Olivia blinked. A strange feeling crossed her face. For the first time that evening, uncertainty replaced confidence. The host finally stepped back toward me. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I hope you'll forgive me for interrupting." He turned toward the audience. "There is something many of you already know." He glanced at me, silently asking permission. I gave a small nod. "And something many of you have waited years to say publicly." The room became perfectly still again. Every organization has a story. Every foundation has a beginning. Every mission starts because one person decides that watching suffering is no longer acceptable. He walked slowly across the stage. When Legacy of Hope existed only as an idea written on a yellow legal pad. When there wasn't a ballroom. There weren't donors. There weren't cameras. There wasn't even an office. There was one man. Nobody moved. The sound system hummed softly. Somewhere across the ballroom, a champagne glass gently touched another. It sounded impossibly loud. The host smiled toward me. He refused recognition. He declined interviews. He rejected naming rights. He asked for one thing: keep the focus on the people being helped. A murmur spread across the audience. Olivia slowly turned toward the board members. One after another, they smiled back at her with expressions that seemed almost sympathetic. Not impressed, sympathetic, as though they realized she had just discovered something everyone else in that room had known for years. The host continued. Every major expansion, every children's wing, every scholarship, every emergency relief program. He insisted the credit belonged to volunteers, never himself. I lowered my eyes for a moment. Those decisions had never felt extraordinary. They had simply felt right. Recognition fades. Impact remains. My father had been right all along. The host finally reached the sentence everyone had been anticipating. The gentleman standing beside me. He paused just long enough for every heartbeat in the ballroom to synchronize. Is not merely one of our supporters. Another pause. He is the reason this foundation exists at all. The ballroom erupted. Applause crashed through the chandeliers like thunder. People stood again. This time, they weren't responding because others stood first. They rose because gratitude outweighed etiquette. I looked toward Olivia. Her face had gone completely pale. Not because she had learned I possessed money, not because of status, but because she had suddenly realized something infinitely more painful. She had spent years introducing herself to a room that had quietly been honoring her husband all along. People often think a legacy begins the day the world notices it. The truth is, every legacy begins when nobody is watching. The applause lingered long after the host stepped away. I waited until the room grew quiet again. Not because I enjoyed the attention, because I wanted everyone to hear what came next. I appreciate your kindness, I said. But if you're going to applaud anyone tonight, applaud the people whose names never make it onto the invitation. I looked across the ballroom. The nurses, the teachers, the volunteers, the foster parents, the people who quietly decide that someone else's pain matters. Another silence settled over the room. This one felt different. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was respect. I've been asked many times why I never accepted recognition for this foundation. I smiled faintly. The answer is disappointingly simple. I never started it to be recognized. The words carried me backward more than 20 years. Back to a winter morning when everything changed. I was 26. Working long hours managing a small construction company, my father had left me. Life wasn't glamorous. It was invoices, concrete dust, late payrolls, coffee that was always cold before I finished it. One afternoon, I stopped by St. Mary's Children's Hospital to visit an employee whose daughter had been diagnosed with leukemia. I expected to stay 15 minutes. Instead, I stayed nearly 4 hours. Not because of the illness, because of what I saw afterward. Parents sleeping upright in plastic chairs. Children pretending not to be afraid because they didn't want their mothers crying. Volunteers bringing blankets that had been donated by strangers who would never meet the families they helped. Nobody complained. Nobody demanded applause. They simply showed up. Again, and again, and again. When I walked back to my truck that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about one little boy. He had smiled at me despite losing his hair, despite the tubes attached to his arms, despite knowing far more about suffering than any child should. I realized something uncomfortable that night. Success had never asked me who I was helping, only how much I was earning. The next morning I called 3 friends, not wealthy men, just good ones. A lawyer, a retired teacher, a local accountant. We met around an old oak table inside the back room of my office. There were no investors, no photographers, no consultants explaining branding strategies. Only coffee, legal pads, and one question. What if we built something that outlived all of us? Nobody laughed. Instead, each man quietly began writing ideas. Scholarships, emergency housing, medical assistance, support for struggling families. By sunset, the yellow legal pad contained what eventually became the first blueprint for Legacy of Hope. The audience listened without moving. Many of them had never heard this story. Neither had Olivia. I glanced toward her. She hadn't looked away from the stage once. The confidence she had worn like jewelry all evening was gone. In its place sat disbelief, perhaps even regret. I remember one conversation especially well. I continued. Our attorney asked where we'd put my name. A few guests smiled. I told him nowhere. Soft laughter spread across the room. He thought I was joking. I wasn't. The audience laughed again. I didn't want buildings named after me. I wanted children healthy enough to walk through them. Applause interrupted the sentence. I waited patiently. When the first major donation arrived, the board asked whether they should announce who had funded the project. I gave them the same answer. No, let people focus on the families, not the donor. The chairman nodded quietly from the front row. He remembered that meeting. Every board member did. I made only one request. If this organization ever becomes successful, promise me you'll never confuse publicity with purpose. The room became still once more. Those words had guided every decision the foundation made for more than 2 decades. Not because they were clever, because they were necessary. Organizations drift. Egos grow. Mission statements become marketing slogans. Someone has to keep reminding people why the work began. I took a slow breath before continuing. Legacy of Hope never belonged to me. It belonged to every person who chose compassion over convenience. I looked toward the volunteers seated near the back of the ballroom. Many were wiping tears from their eyes. Then my gaze drifted once again to Olivia. She looked as though she were searching her memory, trying desperately to find the husband she used to know. Perhaps she was remembering the young man who came home covered in sawdust. The man who quietly disappeared every Saturday morning without explaining where he went. The husband who always returned late, tired, and smiling. She had assumed I was working overtime. She had never asked why I always carried children's drawings folded inside my jacket pocket. Some truths don't stay hidden because they're carefully protected. They stay hidden because no one thinks they're worth asking about. Tonight, for the first time in 22 years, that silence had finally been broken. People think secrets are protected by locked doors. Most of the time, they're protected by simple assumptions. I let the applause fade before speaking again. I've shared where a legacy of hope began. But there is another question I've been asked over the years. I looked around the ballroom. Why disappear? Why stay anonymous? Why spend 2 decades avoiding interviews, awards, and recognition? A few people smiled. Several already knew the answer. Most did not. The truth, I said softly, is that anonymity was never a sacrifice. It was freedom. The room grew quiet again. When no one knows your name, they stop telling you what kind of person you're supposed to become. I slowly walked across the stage. The spotlight followed without making me feel any more important. If people believe you're powerful, they become careful around you. If people believe you're ordinary, they become honest. That sentence lingered. I noticed several guests exchange thoughtful glances. They stop performing. They stop pretending. They reveal who they really are. I wasn't accusing anyone. I was describing something I had watched for years, including inside my own marriage. I looked toward Olivia. She lowered her eyes before I could hold her gaze. Not long ago, she would have smiled proudly from that chair. Tonight, she looked like someone trying to remember the beginning of a story after skipping half the chapters. I've attended dozens of these galas. Sometimes at the front table, sometimes near the back, sometimes wearing an expensive tuxedo, sometimes wearing an old sport coat because I came directly from a construction site. A few people laughed. The interesting part, people treated me differently every single time. More laughter, but I never corrected them, because every assumption taught me something. The ballroom listened with complete attention. I learned which people respected janitors as much as senators. I learned which executives thanked waiters by name. I learned which donors cared about children, and which donors cared about seeing their names engraved on marble walls. The laughter disappeared. The truth had become heavier. Character, I said quietly, is easiest to recognize when nobody thinks they're being evaluated. The chairman smiled. He had heard me say something similar years earlier during one of our first board meetings. I continued. When Legacy of Hope began growing, the board repeatedly suggested putting my name on the organization. I declined. They suggested creating an annual award. I declined. They wanted a portrait. I declined that too. Soft laughter returned. Eventually Richard stopped asking. The chairman laughed openly. So did everyone else. The audience joined him. It wasn't humility. It was practicality. I knew something about human nature. The moment a mission becomes centered around one individual, it begins forgetting the people it exists to serve. Several volunteers nodded. A physician near the front quietly wiped his glasses. The lesson wasn't complicated. It was simply uncommon. I rested one hand on the podium. My greatest contribution wasn't funding the foundation. It wasn't organizing the board. It wasn't expanding the programs. It was making sure the work would continue after nobody remembered my name. Silence. Deep. Respectful. Because everyone understood what I meant. Legacies survive only when they stop depending on the person who started them. I turned toward the volunteers seated in the back. Most of you don't know this, but every year, I still visit our shelters. I still deliver supplies. I still sit beside families waiting for test results, usually wearing jeans, and usually introducing myself simply as Ethan. A murmur swept across the room. Many genuinely hadn't known. I've served meals beside volunteers who had no idea they were arguing with the foundation's founder. The audience laughed. One gentleman once asked if I had ever considered donating. Even I laughed at that memory. I told him I'd think about it. The ballroom erupted with warm laughter. Then it slowly faded. Those moments reminded me why anonymity mattered. People spoke to me without fear. They disagreed. They challenged ideas. They criticized programs that needed improving. They weren't trying to impress anyone. They were trying to help. I looked toward Olivia once more. She was no longer confused. She was remembering all the weekends I quietly disappeared. The countless phone calls I ended by saying, "Tell them I'll be there." The evenings I came home exhausted but strangely peaceful. She had never asked where I went. Eventually, she simply assumed my ordinary life was exactly that. Ordinary. I didn't blame her entirely. Assumptions are comfortable. Questions require curiosity. And curiosity often disappears the moment we believe we already know someone. I offered the audience one final smile. So, if tonight you've learned anything about me, I hope it isn't that I founded this organization. I hope it's something much simpler. Never measure someone's worth by how loudly the world speaks their name. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room has been carrying the heaviest responsibility all along. As the audience rose once again, I noticed something I hadn't seen all evening. Olivia wasn't clapping immediately. She was looking at me with tears gathering in her eyes. Not because the room finally respected me, because she had suddenly realized she had stopped seeing me long before anyone else ever did. The most painful betrayals rarely happen in a single moment. They arrive one small compromise at a time, until one day you realize the person you love has slowly disappeared behind the person they wanted the world to admire. I rested both hands lightly on the podium. "There is one last part of this story," I said. "It's not about a foundation. It's about people." The ballroom remained perfectly still. I've been fortunate enough to meet extraordinary human beings through this work. Doctors who skipped vacations, teachers who spent their own money on hungry students, volunteers who quietly rebuilt homes after disasters. They all had one thing in common. They never believed they were too important to be kind. I paused. Success should make your circle bigger, not your heart smaller. The sentence hung in the air. I wasn't looking at Olivia. Not yet. But success can be deceptive. It whispers. It tells us that appearances matter more than character. That being admired is better than being understood. And if we're not careful, we begin believing it. A quiet stillness settled across the room. I wasn't describing a stranger. I was describing someone I once knew better than anyone. When Olivia and I married, I continued, we owned very little. Our first apartment had a leaky roof. The refrigerator made more noise than the television. A few guests smiled. We counted every dollar. But somehow, we laughed more. I could almost see that tiny apartment again. The second-hand sofa, the scratched kitchen table, the handwritten grocery lists taped to the refrigerator. Back then, we celebrated little victories. A paid-off credit card, a weekend picnic, an evening without worrying about bills. Life had been simple, and somehow richer. Then opportunities arrived. Olivia was talented, intelligent, driven. I encouraged her to accept every invitation, every board position, every chance to grow. I meant every word. I had never wanted her world to become smaller because of me. I was proud of her. I still am. I glanced toward her. She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. But somewhere along the journey, our definitions of success stopped matching. The ballroom remained silent. No single event caused it. There wasn't one terrible decision. There wasn't one dramatic betrayal. It happened quietly, the way sunsets happen. You don't notice the light disappearing until the room is already dark. Several people lowered their eyes. Perhaps they were remembering pieces of their own lives. Conversations became shorter. Dinners became meetings. Vacations became networking opportunities. Our weekends became fundraising calendars. And gradually, image became more valuable than intimacy. I wasn't speaking with anger, only honesty. There were evenings when I came home from visiting families in our shelters. I wanted to tell Olivia about a little girl who had finally received the surgery she needed, or a father who had found work again. But before I finished, her phone would ring. Another gala, another committee, another photograph. I smiled sadly. The story stopped fitting into our evenings. No one interrupted. Even the photographers had lowered their cameras. I don't believe success changed Olivia overnight. I believe it slowly convinced her that being accepted by important people required becoming someone different. And perhaps, I reminded her too much of where we had started. My words were gentle, not accusatory, because resentment had never built anything worth keeping. I kept wearing comfortable clothes. I kept driving the same truck. I kept disappearing on Saturdays. She had mistaken consistency for a lack of ambition, when in truth, it had been contentment. She began introducing me less, then apologizing for me, then pretending I wasn't there. A painful silence swept across the ballroom. No one needed me to explain what had happened earlier that evening. They had all witnessed it. "You're embarrassing me." I repeated the words calmly. They hurt, not because they questioned my appearance, but because they came from someone who once knew exactly who I was. I finally looked directly at Olivia. Tears rested silently on her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. I don't tell you this to embarrass my wife. In fact, I hope no one in this room judges her too quickly. Heads slowly turned toward her. Because the truth is, the world rewards appearances every single day. It rewards status. It rewards recognition. It rewards visibility. It takes enormous discipline not to mistake those rewards for real value. I let that thought settle. We're all vulnerable to that temptation, myself included. The ballroom remained wrapped in thoughtful silence. This was never meant to be a speech about humiliation. It was a reminder that marriages don't usually break because love disappears all at once. They break when admiration quietly replaces gratitude, when image slowly replaces understanding, and when we stop seeing the person standing beside us because we're too busy wondering who's watching from across the room. The greatest victories are rarely announced with anger. They arrive wrapped in grace, leaving everyone else to confront the truth on their own. For several long seconds, no one applauded. No one spoke. The ballroom was filled with something far more powerful than noise. Reflection. I looked across the sea of faces. Some appeared emotional, others uncomfortable. A few stared at the floor, perhaps recognizing pieces of themselves inside my story. Then I smiled. "I promise," I said, "this isn't a sad ending." Several people looked up. In fact, I think it's a hopeful one. The atmosphere shifted almost immediately, because hope has a way of opening hearts that guilt never can. I've learned something after 20 years working with families. The strongest people are not the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who recognize them before it's too late. I stepped away from the podium. No script, no prepared notes, only honesty. When people ask me what legacy of hope actually builds, I usually give the wrong answer. A few guests laughed softly. "We don't build hospitals. We don't build shelters. We don't build scholarship programs." I shook my head. "No, we build second chances." The words echoed gently through the ballroom. Every child deserves one. Every struggling family deserves one. And if we're being honest, so does every marriage. The silence returned. Not awkward, tender. I slowly turned toward Olivia. She looked completely different from the woman who had whispered those painful words less than an hour earlier. The confidence had disappeared. The polished smile had disappeared. Only the woman I married remained. Her eyes were red. Her shoulders had lowered. For the first time in years, she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply looked human. I spoke directly to her, though everyone else was listening. "Olivia." The room became perfectly still. "When you told me I was embarrassing you, it hurt." I didn't rush past the sentence. I allowed its truth to exist. "But not because you embarrassed me." She looked up slowly. "It hurt because I knew you. I knew that wasn't the woman who used to split one hamburger with me." Soft laughter mixed with tears across the audience. "I knew that wasn't the woman who celebrated our first apartment even though rain leaked through the ceiling. I knew that wasn't the woman who cried the first time we could finally afford to buy new furniture." Her lips trembled. "I don't believe she's gone. I think she simply got lost." A tear slipped down Olivia's cheek. She didn't hide it. Neither did I. Life has a strange way of convincing us that we have to become someone else in order to belong. But belonging purchased by pretending always costs too much. The ballroom remained absolutely silent. I could hear someone quietly crying near the back. People have called tonight a surprise. It isn't. The real surprise would have been if I had stood here and chosen revenge. Several heads nodded. Humiliation creates enough pain by itself. It doesn't need help. I rested the microphone against the podium. I don't want my wife to leave this room ashamed. I want her to leave remembering who we were, remembering why we began, remembering that success is supposed to bring two people closer, not teach them to look down on each other. The chairman slowly stood. Then Richard began clapping, not loudly, gently. One by one, every board member joined him. Then every volunteer. Then every guest. The applause spread across the ballroom like a wave. No cheering, no whistles, only respect. It wasn't applause for me anymore. It was applause for forgiveness. When the room finally settled, I stepped down from the stage. The host reached out to shake my hand. Instead, he quietly embraced me. "Thank you," he whispered. "No," I smiled. "Thank you for giving me the chance to remind people what this foundation was built for." As I walked past the front tables, dozens of people reached out. Doctors, donors, governors, volunteers. Not one of them spoke about money. Not one mentioned influence. Every handshake carried the same message: respect. Then I stopped beside Olivia. She slowly rose from her chair. Neither of us spoke immediately. Words weren't ready yet. She looked at me with tears filling her eyes. Her voice broke. She couldn't finish. She didn't have to. Some apologies begin long before they're spoken. I offered the same gentle smile I had given her on the day we married. Not because everything had been repaired, because every repair has to begin somewhere. Then, without another word, I extended my hand toward her. Not as a founder, not as the man the ballroom had just honored, simply as Ethan, the husband who, despite everything that had happened that evening, still believed the greatest miracles in life were never built on perfect people. They were built on people willing to find their way back to each other. Sometimes the loudest lesson in a room isn't spoken from a stage. It's revealed in the quiet moments after the applause has ended. My hand remained extended. For a heartbeat, Olivia simply stared at it. Not because she didn't recognize the gesture, because she did. It was the same hand that had helped her carry boxes into our first apartment. The same hand that had held hers when we buried my father. The same hand that had reached for hers outside a tiny courthouse after we exchanged vows with only 2 witnesses present. Slowly, she placed her trembling fingers into mine. The ballroom seemed to exhale. No cameras flashed. No one interrupted. It felt wrong to disturb the moment. We stood there together while 600 people watched in complete silence. "I'm so sorry," Olivia whispered. Only I could hear her. "I know. You don't understand." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I do." She shook her head. "No, Ethan. I don't think you do." For the first time in years, there was no polished smile. No carefully rehearsed confidence. Only honesty. I spent so long trying to be accepted by people in this room. She looked around the ballroom. That I stopped appreciating the only person who accepted me before I had anything worth offering. Those words hit harder than any apology ever could, because they weren't excuses. They were truth. I squeezed her hand gently. Several guests quietly looked away, giving us a small measure of privacy despite the crowd surrounding us. Then something unexpected happened. Richard Holloway stepped forward. The chairman had known me for over 20 years. He looked at Olivia with kindness instead of judgment. "Mrs. Brooks," he said softly, "I hope you know something." She wiped her eyes. "What is it?" Richard smiled. There wasn't a single board meeting where Ethan spoke about achievements. He only spoke about people. He glanced toward me before continuing. But there was one person he mentioned more than anyone else. Olivia looked confused. "Me?" Richard nodded. "You." She stared at him. "He was proud of you. Every single promotion, every committee appointment, every award. He celebrated them all." Another board member joined us. Then another. Soon half a dozen people stood nearby. None of them had come to congratulate me. They had come to tell Olivia something she had never known. A pediatric surgeon smiled warmly. "The children's surgical wing?" Ethan insisted it be completed 6 months early. Olivia nodded faintly. "I know." The surgeon continued. "He also insisted we move the fundraising gala." She frowned. "Why?" "So he could attend your acceptance ceremony when you became chairwoman of the City Arts Council." Olivia blinked. "I thought your flight was delayed." I smiled softly. "It was easier to let you believe that." Richard laughed quietly. "It wasn't delayed. He spent the afternoon making sure the hospital project stayed on schedule, then drove 3 hours so he wouldn't miss your speech." Another volunteer stepped forward. "The museum restoration dinner?" Olivia looked at her. "You remember that?" The woman smiled. "Ethan donated anonymously to cover the entire event after a sponsor backed out. He specifically requested that no one tell you." "Why?" Olivia whispered. The volunteer looked at me before answering. He said, "Tonight belongs to her." Olivia covered her mouth. Her shoulders began to shake. Memory after memory returned. The flowers that had mysteriously arrived after every milestone. The handwritten notes she had assumed came from assistants. The quiet support that had always appeared exactly when she needed it. She had believed success had finally started rewarding her. She never realized someone had been standing behind the curtain, making sure she never had to carry the weight alone. "I never wanted credit," I said gently. "I wanted you to shine." She closed her eyes. "And I repaid you by trying to hide you." There was no anger left inside me, only sadness for the years we had allowed to slip away. Richard rested a reassuring hand on Olivia's shoulder. "My dear," he smiled kindly. "Every person in this room admired Ethan long before tonight. But do you know what he always said whenever someone praised him?" She slowly shook her head. Richard's eyes softened. He'd smile and say, "If my wife is happy, I've already received every award I need." Olivia broke completely. She stepped forward and wrapped both arms around me. Not because the ballroom expected it, not because cameras were watching, but because, for the first time in a very long while, appearances no longer mattered. Around us, the guests quietly stood. Some smiled, some wiped away tears. No one applauded. This moment didn't belong to the foundation. It didn't belong to the gala. It belonged to two imperfect people finally seeing each other again. And in that silent embrace, I realized something extraordinary. Being honored by 600 strangers felt meaningful. But being truly seen again by the person you once promised forever, that was the recognition I had been hoping for all along. Years from now, I doubt anyone in that ballroom will remember what was served for dinner. They probably won't remember who sat at their table or what songs the orchestra played. But I hope they remember one simple truth. The people we love should never have to earn the respect we promised them on the day we said forever. The gala slowly returned to life. Conversations resumed. Champagne glasses were lifted again. The orchestra began playing softly in the background. But the room felt different now. Lighter, more honest. People no longer approached me because they had discovered the founder of Legacy of Hope. They approached us. Several couples stopped to shake our hands. One elderly gentleman smiled at Olivia. "My wife and I almost lost each other 25 years ago." He gently squeezed her hand. "We're grateful we found our way back." A young volunteer quietly thanked me for the speech. Then she turned toward Olivia. "And thank you for listening." Those words carried no judgment, only compassion. As the evening came to an end, guests slowly drifted toward the ballroom doors. The photographers packed away their equipment. The chandeliers dimmed. Outside, a cool spring breeze rolled through the city streets. Olivia and I walked side by side toward the parking area. For the first time in years, neither of us reached for a phone. Neither of us rushed to the next obligation. The silence between us no longer felt empty. It felt patient. When we reached my old pickup truck, Olivia stopped. She looked at it for several seconds before laughing quietly through tears. "I used to love this truck." I smiled. "You named it." "I did. Old Blue." We both laughed. It had been years since we'd shared a laugh that wasn't scheduled between meetings. She rested one hand against the passenger door. "I spent so much time trying to belong in rooms like that." She looked back toward the glowing ballroom. "That I forgot I already belonged somewhere." I nodded. "Home." She swallowed hard. "With you." The words weren't dramatic. They were enough. She turned toward me. "I don't expect tonight to fix everything." "It won't," I answered honestly. 22 years can't be repaired in 22 minutes. She smiled sadly. "I know, but..." She hesitated. "Would you let me try?" I looked at her for a long moment. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the polished socialite who had mocked me beneath crystal chandeliers. She was the young woman who once believed happiness could fit inside a tiny apartment with a leaking roof. That woman had never disappeared completely. She had simply become buried beneath expectations. "We'll both have to try," I said. She nodded. Together. Together. It had been a long time since that word felt real. A week later, Olivia quietly resigned from 2 charitable committees. Not because charitable work lacked value, but because she realized serving people and collecting titles were not always the same thing. Months later, we visited one of Legacy of Hope's family shelters together. No photographers came. No press releases were written. She spent an afternoon reading books to children while I repaired a broken playground gate. When we drove home, she looked happier than she had after any gala. 1 year later, the board offered to rename the foundation in my honor upon my retirement. I thanked them, then declined. Again, Richard laughed. "I already knew your answer." He did. Some traditions deserve to survive. Legacy of Hope remained exactly what it had always been. A promise, not a monument. As for Olivia and me, our marriage wasn't magically perfect. Real marriages never are. We still disagreed. We still carried scars. But we started asking questions again, listening again, seeing each other again. And slowly, ordinary moments became extraordinary once more. Sometimes we'd eat takeout in the back of my pickup truck after volunteering together. Sometimes we'd sit quietly on our porch without saying anything at all. Neither of us missed the galas as much as we once imagined. Because peace has a way of making applause sound surprisingly small. Every now and then, someone recognizes me at a fundraising event. They usually ask the same question. Mr. Brooks, what's the greatest achievement of your life? They expect me to mention the foundation, or the hospitals, or the scholarships. I always smile before answering. No, my greatest achievement isn't something I built. It's someone I chose to keep believing in. Then I glance toward Olivia. She smiles back, not because the room is watching, but because we're finally looking at each other again. And if there's one lesson I hope stays with you long after this story ends, it's this. Never be ashamed of the person who quietly stood beside you before the world learned your name. Because titles fade, applause disappears, fortunes change, but the character of the person holding your hand when nobody else is clapping, that is the rarest legacy any of us will ever receive.